Matt Taibbi and Joe Rogan's conversation on the Joe Rogan Experience drew more attention after they bantered about former CNN anchor Brian Stelter at the World Economic Forum. Taibbi said he looked very comfortable there, didn't he? To which Rogan responded, of course he does. He's with evil lizard people trying to control the world. Let's take a closer look.
We heard at the World Economic Forum, right? We heard
Brian Stelter was there.
Brian Stelter.
Brian Stelter's now at the World Economic Forum. What can we do about these problems?
He looked very comfortable there, didn't he?
Of course he does. He's with evil lizard people that are trying to control the world. That's his bosses. He knows how to handle that kind of situation. I've been around these evil lizard people.
He looked as happy as maybe he's ever been.
Well, he's probably very excited just to be working again in any way, shape, or form.
That's true.
You know, I mean, he's not a guy that really is supposed to be in front of a camera, right? He's supposed to be a journalist, but he's not even good at that. So what he's doing now is holding water for the evil leaders of the world who want to institute hate speech policies nationwide and, you know, centralized digital currency, and they want everybody to eat bugs and you will own nothing and be happy. This is the people he's working for now, because he's basically a prostitute, and you know they hired him to go over there and do that, and he's like, what can we do? What can we do better?
Yeah.
What can we do different to get everybody to stand in line?
I'm not one for personal attacks. It's just not my style. So there was a lot of maligning of Brian Stelter's appearance, etc., that I don't think is appropriate. However, I heartily agree, and we covered very rigorously the amount of bad conversations being had at the World Economic Forum, specifically on the topic, and the panel that he hosted, I think, was quite disastrous from all about disinformation and the goal of combating it. Now, Brian Stelter was not he was the moderator, so I wish he would have done more to bring into tension or show the tension between policing misinformation and the downsides of that and the threats to free speech. He was not the number one most alarming advocate for censorship. That distinction, I think, belonged to the publisher of the New York Times, who was also on that panel, was essentially advocating policies to stop social media from amplifying at all anyone's speech other than the New York Times speech, which was alarming. And then also there was that regulator from the European Union making it sound like hate speech is coming to a shore near you, to the Americas.
It does feel like a weird target to bring in your sights. Of all of the people in that one panel to have criticisms of, it seems
Stelter's
weirdly
been a punching bag for Rogan type, for lots of people. I mean, we've criticized him constantly.
Yeah, I would like to think substantively, my problem with these kinds of critiques is not that, as you say, there's not some kernel of truth in the frustration about the way that social media is being policed and the biases that exist and all of those sorts of things. But so often the criticism becomes so wide, so wild, that it feels like you're just doing a scattershot, spray, that it's not very targeted, and you lose kind of a kind of credibility. So now where I want to agree with you and have a conversation about media criticism or how Brian Stelter might have been able to frame questions that heighten the contradictions better. Now, am I supposed to be nodding along with the lizard people of it all? I don't know. It's not for me. I'm not the audience.
Lizard
I can appreciate
discourse.
that. But
not for you.
I've been thinking about this a lot in the context of the way that the word woke and wokeness is deployed. Because, I'm someone whose journalism career started because I basically wrote a freelance article criticizing the weaponization of identity politics. That has always been a through thread of all of my work. I never used a word like woke, and I was very clear to say I don't like the weaponization of identity politics. Not identity itself. I don't want any marginalized groups to be attacked. That is not my agenda, and I know how slippery words are. And I've been thinking about how woke, because it is this term that is invested with so much and so unspecific, ends up covering for, standing in for stuff that a lot of people wouldn't agree with if you did get more specific. I might be anti-wokeness, but am I pro-book ban? I might be anti-wokeness, but am I pro-banning dressing and drag? I might be anti-wokeness, but am I pro preventing 16-year-olds from logging on to Facebook? So in the same way, I do sometimes think that the language about lizard people and stuff, it's not just silly, but it can be arguably start to get nefarious because it allows people to attribute qualities, ideas, etc. to people that aren't really there, and they get away with it because all of the language is so vague. So I don't want to be like a scold, but I am a little unsettled because there's so much there I think I'd like to agree with, but I'm increasingly hesitant about buying in to a kind of discourse that casts such a wide net and which kind of seems like it is invested more in the personal attack than it is on these really important ideas that we need to be getting to the bottom of.
Attack the ideas rather than the person, right?
Yeah.
That's something we're told to do and we try to do most of the time. I don't love the lizard people.
What is that?
But I guess it's so outlandish that hopefully people aren't taking it really.
Yeah, I don't mean to be so self-serious here. I know he's a comedian and it's a joke.
Yeah. I mean, with wokeness, I don't know. I guess I would push back a little bit on that one. Because there can be saying that a certain word is imprecise or being used imprecisely can be a tactic for not engaging with the saying, well, what do you even mean by that? I don't know. What are you? That's not what people do that with critical race theory, right? Which was a word being used for not its original thing. But okay.
So just
wokeness,
say what you don't
politically
like.
correct, but it's got to say. You got to say something, and no matter what you say, some people will come back and say, "Oh, well, you're not actually using that word correctly. That means that, not that." I'm like, okay, but we all kind of know what I'm describing here.
Look, when we had that,
tell me what the word is you want us to use. We'll call it whatever that is.
But that's the thing. It's like there's so much in there. So we had that segment a couple of weeks back about the list of words you're not supposed to say anymore, and we went through. It wasn't just one. We might agree that it's weird to have a list of words. You and I even might agree on that.
Yeah.
And then when we go through the list, there's many of the words that we also agree are dumb to exclude.
Yeah.
Right? But the deeper we go into it, the more specific we are, there are actually disagreements. Maybe I agree that you shouldn't say this word, and you think that you should be able to say that word, but others. So I think that there's a value in being specific because ultimately you're going to get misfires when you're overly broad. You're going to get books that were perfectly good banned because they fell under the wrong cohort, or you're going to get teachers preemptively pulling books because they don't want to face criminal penalties or jail time, and so often, like I had a conversation with Andrew Sullivan last year or the year before on my podcast, and we were talking about wokeness, and I was like, well, just define it, like just tell me specifically an example, and he brought up some of the kind of being on time is racism arguments about, and I'm like, the
aspects of white supremacy.
I also agree that is silly. And look, now we've had an agreement because you were able to be narrow enough in the thing that you're criticizing. But if you just walk around saying wokeness is bad, I know how that's being deployed to legally limit other people's rights. And so, no, I'm not going to agree with that. And now we look like we're on opposite sides of the issue, an issue that we're not necessarily even on opposite sides of.
So that specific example, I actually wrote something about that being used in the city of Seattle. I didn't end up doing a radar on it. Maybe I'll do a radar for it for next week. It's pretty wild, the degree to which this municipality imposed on its employees training and practices based on the document you're describing. It's the aspects of white supremacy. Actually, Ryan Grimm, our former host, did a great interview for The Intercept with Tema Okun, who is the anti-racist activist who created that list in the first place, where she basically swore off its current use and said she had no idea that she was just, and also kind of implicitly conceding that it doesn't really have a scientific basis. She just kind of wrote it almost as a tribute to a friend of hers,
and she did
not want it to be used in this way. She said she never promoted or spread it. It was spread by others. She said she knows people, like good people who are anti-racist, who have lost their jobs because someone was applied these principles against them. She thinks it's very harmful.
I'm not surprised because so much of this, like the critique that the left has made about CRT and the way that's been weaponized by the right is largely that even if you disagree with it, it was only supposed to be an academic discipline.
Yeah.
The reason we say, oh, it's a law school thing, it's not about kids, it's not because we're denying necessarily that there are aspects of what is being taught to kids that we might disagree with. But by making an attack on CRT, which is just it's like thought experiment. A lot of things get said and argued in college that nobody really believes. It's just learning how to make an argument.
A lot of people making a good faith criticism of wokeness or CRT actually mean the aspects of white supremacy documented and related
Sure,
work by
totally, but then what
two or three other
happens?
people. We just call it wokeness because that's 2 syllables.
Sure, but then what happens? CRT is vilified, and now you have African American history classes being stripped from the curriculum because as things actually get closer and closer to being CRT, the University of Florida can't teach these African American history classes. Well, that is getting close to CRT, and there are a lot of people who have no problem with it being banned because they've been told it's something that it's not.
Yeah.
So it's a gateway that's really pernicious.
I think most people would say, right, don't ban the certain African American books, but also city governments, any workplace should not operate off
It's
that
DEI,
document.
it's not CRT.
Yes.
That's the acronym we need to be upset about.
100% agreement. 100% agreement. And I think most people would agree with, and if you showed exactly what we're talking about here, people get that.
Yeah.
It's really across the spectrum.
Yeah.
More Rising right after this. Stay tuned.